To discuss here with MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde, MS Now military analyst Colonel Jack Jacobs, former JAG Corps captain Margaret Donovan, and former Navy Reserves intel officer and senior Pentagon official Mark Jacobson. And so, David, right off the bat, Hegseth and Democrats, they were clashing over Iran's nuclear facilities and capabilities. What stands out to you so far of what we've heard?
To be honest, sort of just how partisan Secretary Hegseth has been. All Defense Department leaders, secretaries are appointed by presidents, but it's sort of extraordinary here. And a reporter from the Washington Post noted that he ad-libbed a statement saying that the biggest challenge in terms of the Iran war that he's saying the U.S. military faces are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans. And that sort of shocked me in its tone. I haven't heard defense secretaries use that tone. And what he's really here to talk about also is the cost of this budget. This is the largest increase in defense spending year over year since World War II. It's a massive increase in spending. And the strategy he's embraced as defense secretary is very expensive weapons, airstrikes that he and the president argue are going to cause countries to capitulate. That broad strategy of airstrikes alone, hugely expensive weapons, has not worked. Iran has not capitulated. This war is not over. Gas prices are still high. So it was just partisanship and not really justifying this budget or this war.
Colonel Jack, what stands out to you and what will you be listening for?
Well, the one thing that knocked me was General Kane's response to the last question when he was asked about effectively about the independence of the military to carry out its missions, and how what we're doing in Iran seems almost diametrically opposed to the strategic plan, basically, of the United States, in that we were going to be focused on the Indo-Pacific and a lot of other threats, which were very, very substantial. And we've pulled resources away from there in order to attack Iran. And his response was that the president can do whatever he wants. I mean, that's clear. He managed to dodge the bullet and coming down on one side or the other. But effectively, his message was, forget about what's in our national strategic interest. This president does whatever he wants.
Yeah, Margaret, what stood out to me is a lot of sort of fiery rhetoric coming from the defense secretary, especially in his opening statement, especially in the clashes that we saw early with the ranking member, Adam Smith. Not a lot of substance when it comes to drilling down on details and having answers about, one, why now for the strikes on Iran and the kind of threat Iran actually still poses.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious at this point that Secretary Hegseth is not the man with the answers. He doesn't have substance. He doesn't have details. He's sort of in charge of culture wars. And then if congressmen and women want answers, they're going to have to turn to General Kane for anything related to military strategy. But I echo Colonel Jacobs' concern here. The response by General Kane, it was dodged a bullet, so to speak, because he said this is ultimately up to the president, which is true. And the president and the White House and the entire executive branch is going to point to Congress and say, as long as you keep authorizing these budgets, you're implicitly approving what I'm doing here. So Congress does have power. They do have leverage, but they have to actually flex their muscle by imposing their authorities to control these budgets and to control these fundings. I also think that it's really notable, the sort of juxtaposition of the threat that we have pivoted from in terms of the Indochina threat, in terms of Russia. We are seriously depleted in resources here, and we can talk about how victorious we are militarily, but it is not without cost. We have lost something like 24 MQ-9 Reapers. That's about 10% of the U.S. fleet. We are down 4 F-15s. The Gulf states have expended, I think, something like 2,000 Patriot interceptors. There's only about 600 made in production each year. So there is a serious depletion of resources that we would normally stockpile for this type of regional threat and that are now being used on, what I think Congressman Courtney very articulately explained, a really low-ranking threat in terms of priority of how we use those resources.
Yeah, I was writing down what he said of that January threat assessment in which it was China, Russia, North Korea that were deemed to be the biggest threats against the U.S. right now. And in terms of military competitiveness and capabilities, Iran was described in that January report before this latest war as weaker and more vulnerable. That was at that time, and yet that's why we're also hearing questions about why now go after Iran. Mark, you have advised past defense secretaries. What's your take on Secretary Hegseth's testimony so far?
I want to play off something Margaret was just speaking about, and that is we have a conflict here where there have been many goals put out there. So let's just take a couple of them. Let's degrade or get rid of Iran's capability to enrich uranium. And now, of course, because of the way the situation's developed, we have the problem with the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, no matter who's testifying, it's clear that I think it was only 6 or so ships that got through the channel the last few days, when normally it's about 150 per day. So the question in my mind is, are all these little tactical or even operational victories with the airstrikes over the last couple of weeks worth the strategic outcome we're seeing in Iran? And then there's a bigger question. What about the risk, the strategic risk we are creating in terms of our problems all over the world by focusing on this and probably focusing on Iran in the wrong way, only using one element of our national power, and that is military? These are the questions I would like to see the members of the House, and then I think tomorrow the members of the Senate Armed Services Committee dive into. These are the really important questions here. Is, as we used to say in the Pentagon, is the juice worth the squeeze?
We're continuing to keep an eye on that committee room where this hearing will be back in action, of course, after the votes that they've broken for to go cast. David Hurst, who is a third person who was up there, he didn't offer an opening statement, probably unfamiliar to most of our viewers. He's the acting chief financial officer and comptroller for the Department of Defense. He's somebody who was there to be kind of the money guy, to talk numbers when we're drilling down on the defense budget and this budget request. One of the big question marks going into this hearing is just how much is the Iran war actually costing? And he reportedly said it's about $25 billion so far. How does that line up from your reporting?
So Democrats, and there's always partisan dynamics here, they estimate it's around $50 billion. And I reported with Julia Jester, a colleague of mine, and then NBC News reported that the damage to U.S. bases and aircraft is much more larger than the administration has put out there. And Hegseth has not disclosed this in the press conferences he's had. So I think there'll be questions about that. In a way, these cheap Shahed drones that cost tens of thousands of dollars to make got through much more than expected, more so than Iranian ballistic missiles, and they destroyed a lot of facilities and buildings. And it was a deadly strike that killed 7 U.S. service members in Kuwait. That's a challenge to, again, this extraordinary amount of money they're planning to spend on high-tech weapons that are being effectively countered and sometimes by these much cheaper weapons used by the Iranians.
Yeah, they want to triple drone spending. They want $30 billion to restock depleted critical munitions, $750 billion for a new category called presidential priorities, among other things that are part of this record $1.5 trillion budget requests. David Rowe, Colonel Jack Jacobs, Margaret Donovan, and Mark Jacobson, thank you. Please stay close.